Okay, guys. So we're going to go on to our new unit today. It's the third part in the natural environment. So we're looking now at marine processes and landforms. Okay. The key focus today is going to be again about sort of erosional processes, but we're going to talk you through a bit more about what you're kind of looking at throughout this unit. So again, similar to the rivers unit, we're looking at things like, erosion, transportation, deposition, and the associated features that are linked to those various processes. Okay. I won't read them all out here, but we'll talk through them as we kind of go. We're also looking at things like coral reefs and mangrove swamps, and in terms of how, the conditions that are needed for them to establish themselves. As with rivers, we're also looking at the hazards on our coastlines, okay, particularly with things like coastal erosion, which we'll talk about today, but also things from tropical storms. We'll do some case study work where you'll look at, these hazards, and we'll look at how to manage these hazards, okay, and how to manage the impacts, particularly with regards to reducing things like coastal erosion. All right, so that's really an overview of what we're kind of looking at in this unit. So to start with, what I want you to do is have a watch of this sort of video. Kind of gives you an overview of a bit about coastal erosion. I know the video is a bit dated, and there might be some terminology that you don't totally understand in here. That will hopefully be picked up over the next kind of few lessons. So watch this. It's about a 4-minute video to start with that gives you a bit of an overview in terms of what coastal erosion is and how it is actually impacting our coasts. Once you've done that, I want you to start thinking about reminding yourselves some of the key terminology we looked at when we did the rivers unit. So weathering, mass movement, erosion, transportation, deposition. Can you remember what all of those are? If you can't, I suggest you go back and have a look at some of these definitions, because it's important you understand these definitions for this part of the unit also. If we're looking at erosion, today, obviously, we're going to look at it in terms of coastal erosion, but the same processes apply. What I want you to do here, though, is that the processes are slightly different, but if we've still got the same kind of terminology. So the different types of erosion, we've got hydraulic action, abrasion, attrition, and solution. So watch the video on the left-hand side. As you watch this, I want you to note down the terminology and the definition for each type of erosional process as you go. Okay, so watch the video, note down the definition. The key thing we're looking at is obviously things like coastal erosion and weathering processes here. Again, we've got various types of weathering processes that happen that affect our coastline. Okay, we have things like biological weathering on our coasts. Okay, where we've got roots and plants that grow down through, okay, and cause cliff faces to break off, to erode away. Okay, we've got chemical weathering that's taking place. Okay, anywhere where we've got rain or water and things, we're going to get some form of chemical weathering that happens. All right, and particularly here when we start including a lot of a high content of salt from the sea in it. So we've got a lot of chemical weathering that's going on. Okay, and we've got a lot of mechanical weathering. Okay, and those are the key processes that we're looking at today, those weathering kind of processes. Sorry, the erosional processes. Looking at how our cliff lines are eroded away. Okay, you will have looked in the previous video in terms of, the hydraulic action that takes place. This is kind of where sort of air and water is forced, okay, into these sort of cracks. That forces it to expand. it then cracks and large sort of rocks sort of break away. All right, we've got abrasion. Okay, so as the waves come in, they pick up rocks and hurl them at the cliffside. Okay, that erodes the cliffside away. We've also got attrition. Okay, and that's where you've got these rocks rubbing against, almost called the sandpaper effect. Okay, where these rocks are rubbing against each other and slowly wearing down. And then we've got solution. Okay, we've got that chemical breakdown due to the salt content in the water. So weathering, again, we've got mechanical and physical, okay, that's sort of taking place, you know, where rock fragments are breaking off. You know, we can see over on this side, that could be due to rain, surface runoff, freeze-thaw action that you've looked at before. Okay, we've got the idea of chemical weathering, and we've got biological weathering that's happening. So same as it would do in your rivers. We've also got a lot of mass movement. Okay, now we looked at mass movement when we looked at the formation of V-shaped valleys. Okay, where the valley sides, gravity forces them down, and sort of falls into the valley. The river then takes that debris away. So it's sort of cutting vertically down. Same thing can apply here. Okay, so cliff faces, if they get too top heavy, often due to, you know, things like heavy rainfall, the weight of them will force the cliff to actually collapse. Okay. Also, if you've got wave action that's eroding the base of the cliff, if we go back to this diagram here, you can see the wave action is slowly eroding away. This will go further and further back until this becomes top heavy, and then this will break off and fall into the sea. We've got things like rock slides, and this particularly happens in your more softer rocks, your sedimentary rocks. In your harder igneous kind of rocks, you'll find your cliff faces are much more vertical, and they're much more or much less prone to erosion. Sedimentary rocks, your sandstones, you know, your mudstone, that sort of thing, erode away very, very quickly. Okay, so we've got this mass movement, this slumping of the cliff that just under its own pressure just falls downwards into basically into the sea. Okay, a lot of this is caused, obviously, we're talking about wave action here. And how these waves, the waves are ultimately what is providing a lot of sort of power. They're a huge erosional force, particularly at times when we've got storms. Okay, we can see the waves are forced into onto land. Okay, and we can see how the water sort of spirals around. The waves sort of reach up and then crash down onto the beach, and that's the sort of the erosive power that we kind of get. Now, not all waves are destructive in that sense. Okay, but depending on how destructive they are is often depend on how, you know, how strong the winds have been. Okay, how long the wind has been blowing for. Okay, so it might have been blowing for several weeks, and therefore it's really built up a lot of energy. We also have to look in terms of how far the waves have traveled. We call that the fetch. So, you know, if we've got a big storm out in the Pacific Ocean, okay, those waves have traveled a huge long distance. That allows the energy, the momentum of those waves to build up. Okay, and it's also affected by beach steepness as well. Okay, and we'll look at that in terms of destructive waves and constructive waves. Destructive waves are waves that are going to cause erosion. Every wave you see will have what is called a wavelength. That is, you know, we've got basically a trough in the center, and then we've got the sort of the wave front and then the wave peak. Okay, the distance between the peak of the two waves is the wavelength. Okay, the shorter that wavelength, often the more violent the waves will be and the more erosion that they will cause. Okay, so the wave basically, as they sort of become shorter, those waves are often pushed up. Okay, so the water comes into the shore. Obviously, it has nowhere to go, so it can only kind of really kind of force its way up. It then depends that often then those waves then come crashing down and cause a very much vertical downward erosional movement. And these are ones that are very, very destructive. Okay, you'll notice on the bottom here it says it has a weak swash and a very strong backwash. So a swash is how the water runs and pushes sediment onto the beach. Okay, so where it says it's weak, it means it's not really pushing much sediment onto the beach and up on the beach. Okay, where we've got a strong swash, we often have things like dunes. We have deposition kind of sort of building up and things like that. Where we've got a strong backwash, okay, as we do in this wave, it is taking a lot of sediment back out to sea, and that's when it sort of starts. You get these deposition features out at sea, sandbars and things like that. If we look at the next diagram, we can see this is a constructive wave. Okay, we can see the wavelength is very different. Okay, there's quite a great distance between the wave heights or the peak of the wave here. Because of this, okay, and the way the waves are sort of orbiting in a circular sort of motion, it gains, as it sort of comes into land, it gains little height, and therefore, because it's not gaining much height, its downward force is a lot less. Therefore, it's not eroding the beach. Okay, that water, because we've got quite a gentle slope on this beach, it's therefore pushing the sediment up the beach, and we call that then a strong swash. Because there's less energy in it, it's therefore taking less material back out, so we've got a weak backwash. Okay, so we're resulting in more deposition that's happening on our coastline. All right. Okay, so in Google Classroom, you will find a worksheet on coastal erosion landform and processes. This runs through quite a few different landforms and features. You need to basically use your textbooks to help you answer these questions, and it will cover features similar to what we're seeing on here. Okay, so it will cover, you know, why does a coastline often look like this, where we've got bays and we've got headlands, bays, headlands, bays, headlands, like this, almost this sort of motion. We'll also look at some of the features of a headland, like an arch and a stack and a stump, and what those kind of things mean. We'll also look at sort of wave cut platforms. Okay, so these are key erosional features, landform features you would find on a coastline. So use your textbooks to answer those questions. Next lesson, we will actually be moving on into depositional features from there. Any questions? Send them my way, Google Classroom and email as always.